So my name is Burrell Poe. I'm here with the Rain Ready program. We take a community advocacy approach to stormwater issues. We noticed that traditionally, whenever things stormwater were related, either it flooded and a bunch of people are yelling at their elected officials, or action is taken on something behind closed doors, and maybe you're trying to get home to park and your street's all torn up. And you're like, why is it torn up? And they're like, we're building a new sewer or something like that. That people aren't involved in the conversation as to what's going on. The problem is getting worse due to climate change, or whatever you want to call it. The weather's changing. We are getting more frequent 100-year rain events in the Chicagoland area. So it is something that's getting worse. Our last 100-year storm in April 2013, and then there was another one in the 90s, and then there was another one in the 80s, and they're becoming more and more frequent. So they're no longer actually 100-year storms. They happen very, very frequently. So we have to get prepared. We have to get ready for the rain. So the story of Rain Ready started with Harriet Festing. She was hired by the Center for Neighborhood Technology from England to run a program called Sustainable Backyards. And the idea behind Sustainable Backyards was the kind of message that we've been hearing today, which is we need to do better with our green space in Chicago and utilize it better, grow better things, really distribute knowledge and understanding about this to homeowners so that regular people and citizens can take action on their own properties, and can encourage their elected officials to take the kind of actions that are necessary to building a better green space in Chicago. So planting the right plants, native flowers, composting, and tons of other things. And in getting this message out, Harriet noticed that no one was really listening, and that the only people who would show up in a room and the only people who were interested in talking about these kind of things were people who were already doing these kind of things. And it wasn't getting out to the average homeowner. The average homeowner wasn't interested in how they can do better things using their yards. They were just thinking about, well, I need to mow it, and it's kind of annoying, and I wish the city would get rid of that tree out there, it's dying. So she did a study called The Cost and Prevalence of Urban Flooding, which is over there. And it was a landmark study in that it showed that flooding was huge in the Chicagoland area. Lots of people were getting water in their basements. It was a huge problem, and no one was talking about it. You can pretty much randomly call any alderman and say, hey, you have a flooding issue in your community, and they'll say, no, I don't, bye, and that would be the end of the conversation. But we looked at insurance data and FEMA data for a 5-year period from 2007 to 2011. It's about 5 years, right? 4 or 5 years, ish. And discovered that billions of dollars are wasted annually in the Cook County area on the issue of flooding. And a lot of the reason why people are flooding is because our urban areas have been getting more denser, and there's less green space, and there's less places to manage the water where it lands. We're completely reliant in Chicago on our man-made systems that were built primarily in the 50s. In some places, like in Graceland West, they're about 100 years old. And we're relying on the system in a time where there's more storms and more rain, right? On a system that was built when there were less people, less urban density, more places for the water to be infiltrated. And it culminated in this huge disaster of people getting water in their homes quite frequently. Earlier, Westtown was mentioned. There's a lot of development going on in Westtown, and Westtown is plagued by new homeowners. We've had it several times. Last November, we invited a group of residents to come for a party where we just, got together and we ate food and we talked. Someone came in and said, I just bought a condo in West Town, and I get, my space gets flooded every time it rains pretty much. And it's because there's very little infiltration in her neighborhood. The sidewalks are super, grandiose. They're wide for the widest people, I guess, to walk on maybe a horse or something. I don't know what it was. Why is it so wide? And the streets are so wide. And the new development is just like, why do I need a backyard? Let's pave it over. Why do I need a front yard? Let's build all the way to the tip of that property. Let's get as much square footage as we can into this thing. And these kind of ideas have come together to create a real problem. So we decided that what if we talked directly to people? What if we started listening to the stories of these homeowners and broadcasting them? So we talked with homeowners, and one homeowner, if you can see on our website, rainready.org, is Lori Burns. She lives in the Chatham community on the south side of Chicago. Chatham is a historically African-American middle-class neighborhood that came to be in the late 60s, early 70s, where a lot of middle-class African-Americans, teachers, and people who worked for the city and other working-class jobs moved to Chatham in order to stake a claim and start a life. The problem is that Chatham is the hardest hit neighborhood in Cook County by urban flooding. There are constantly, a lot of people flood kind of every time it rains. And we met Lori Burns after the April 2013 flood, where she said she was sick of it. It was enough was enough. She moved into her family home in order to preserve it, in order to preserve their legacy in the community. And she's just like, I want to move. I don't want to be here anymore because I constantly get flooded. She had maggots in her basement. She had lost precious memorabilia from her family because that's stuff that you can't replace. When the flood waters come in, it ruins absolutely everything. And her story was featured in the Washington Post. So after we've gathered those stories and really talked about the devastating human aspect of flooding, oftentimes when we talk about flooding, we look at gallons. No offense. We look at gallons of water. How all these metrics and all these numbers, but it's a real human disaster in that a lot of people are losing money constantly. They're literally throwing money into the rain, money that they could have used to invest in their communities or to invest in their homes, invest in their children, in their livelihood, that's spent cleaning up a mess that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So we said we need to figure out something to do about this. Like we know it's a problem. We're raising awareness that it's a problem, but what do we do about it? So we came up with two solutions. One is the Rain Ready Home program. So the Rain Ready Home program is an assessment-based program where if someone is identified as someone who deals with frequent flooding, we send an assessor to their house to figure out why they're flooding. And what we've learned is that there are a lot of different problems that are going on. Like a lot of people get sewage backup. That is the biggest problem in the Chicagoland area. And we have a combined sewer, which means that your poop and rainwater goes into the same place in order to be sent to a plant to be treated before it can be dumped into the river, or sometimes it's dumped directly into the river and the lake. And it ends up in people's homes. So you have raw sewage. It's not just raw flood waters coming in, but it's sewage and everything. It becomes very toxic. There are a lot of health impacts related to that. And it can be a really, really, really devastating issue. And that comes from the sewer being overwhelmed and backing up into people's homes during a large rain event. And then sometimes people are flooding themselves. So they have their property and their landscapes are graded the wrong way, and they bought their property, and not everybody knows, hey, maybe I should look at the way that my landscape is sloped when they're buying their home or inheriting their home. And a lot of connected downspouts. In Chicago, that's still a thing. In most other urban places where they tell you to put your water out into your lawn, but we connect them directly into the sewer, into the sewer on people's land, on their property, and the water from their roof and wherever else on their property goes into their local sewer and comes back into their basement. A lot of times this is because it can't go out into the street sewer because the street sewer is too full. So after finding out some of these things, we give the homeowner a set of recommendations. Do this to your landscape, plant a rain garden, disconnect your downspout, put it into the rain garden so that you don't have to worry about pouring water into your neighbor's property. Regrade your land, put in a backflow preventer, and the other set of recommendations that are particular to what's going on on that person's property. And we try, because we're a nonprofit, so we try to find the cheapest way to do this. So it's not a permaseal kind of fix where it's just like, we're just gonna spray your house with all this cool stuff, we're gonna seal it in, and then we're gonna build a moat, and we're gonna do all this cool stuff for $50,000. But we were able to solve Lori's problem for $7,000. She had spent over $17,000 over the years in mitigating effects and got a quote from Permasil that was extremely expensive, so she couldn't afford it. And we delivered these set of recommendations to her. She got the recommendations and she implemented the recommendations, and now she doesn't flood anymore. So we identified one of the solutions is there has to be a home by home based assessment method. So that's one of our recommendations when we talk to elected leaders, that it doesn't have to be us, but at some point you're going to have to go home by home. In a lot of cases, home by home, in order to figure out what's going on and to find mitigation efforts for that property specifically. And then two, we noticed that in the community there are a lot of places that are super built up. So what happens if I'm in a community like Westtown where there is no greens, there's a severe lack of green space? What do? Well, you really need to come together and you need to encourage that when new development is happening, that you get green space, that you have places for water to be infiltrated. When there are upgrades on the sidewalk, when there are upgrades in the parkways, that you have a group of residents who know what they want in their neighborhood. They want more green infrastructure and are able to call for that in order to stop the flooding. And give water other places to go than into the sewer system. So managing water where it lands in public spaces. So that sometimes looks like talking with the school, the local school. That sometimes looks like talking with a group of homeowners. We call them resident action groups. And really trying to put pressure on elected officials and agencies to actually get things done. So.